For around 200 years, the Foot Guards and Household Cavalry have celebrated the Sovereign's birthday in the best way they know. And once again, the men of the Household Division are assembled on Horse Guards Parade Ground to troop the colour on the occasion of the Queen's 69th official birthday, on what is sadly a rather grey and dirty day. With its multi-million-pound refit complete, Horse Guards building is once again the working headquarters of the Household Division, with the Major General's office above the central archway, providing a grandstand seat for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and her guests, who will be arriving shortly. As for the last 2 years, there are 6 guards on parade, each guard comprised of 3 officers and 70 guardsmen. Guardsmen, as opposed to privates, is a title that was conferred on them by King George V after the First World War, in honour of the splendid services rendered by the Brigade of Guards. And these men, who today will demonstrate their superb ceremonial abilities, maintain all the fighting skills of the modern technological soldier. A number of them on parade today served in the Falklands and Gulf War and with the United Nations in the former Yugoslavia, as exemplified by the colour party of the 1st Battalion Scots Guards, whose colour is being trooped today. Holding the colour is Colour Sergeant Alex Cameron, who fought in the Falklands. And beside him is Lance Corporal Johnny Halliday, who sustained shrapnel injuries in a live-firing exercise in the Gulf War. They will eventually hand over the colour to the escort, found from right flank of the 1st Battalion Scots Guards, the tallest men in the battalion. Beside them, number 2 Guard is essentially left flank of the battalion, the next tallest group. The Scots Guards are actually the oldest of the Guards regiments, having been formed in 1642. But because Oliver Cromwell disbanded them for 9 years, they come 3rd in the order of seniority, behind the Grenadier and Coldstream Guards, hence their nickname, the Kiddies. Number 3 Guard are also Scots. They're F Company, who are the remnants of the old 2nd Battalion that was disbanded in 1992 and are now based permanently in London on ceremonial duties. Number 4 Guard is found by the 1st Battalion of the Grenadier Guards, who as the senior regiment traditionally fought on the right flank of the line, hence the white plumes on the left-hand side of their bearskins, so that the commander sitting in the centre behind the lines of foot guards could instantly recognise them as grenadiers. Number 5 Guard completes the long line, and they too are grenadiers, members of Nijmegen Company, the remnants of 2nd Battalion, who trooped their colour last year before going into suspended animation. And around the corner, number 6 Guard are another company based permanently in London. They're called, rather confusingly, number 7 Company, and they uphold the traditions and history of 2nd Battalion Coldstream Guards, which disappeared in December '93. And lined up in front of Horse Guards building, 18 officers, 3 per guard, a captain, a subaltern and an ensign, who shortly will draw their swords and then take post in front of their respective guards. With the familiar sights of Whitehall and Westminster in the background, St James's Park provides a green oasis of tranquility, one that was rescued from marshland by King Henry VIII, who bought it from Eton College in 1531 to create a park for deer hunting. Charles II preferred a more ornamental park, and his landscaping of 1660 was then redesigned by John Nash in 1827 to include the large lake. The mile of pink tarmac that bisects the great avenue of London plane trees has witnessed many a magnificent occasion of state since it was built in 1904 in memory of Queen Victoria. The Mall, lined by 294 officers and guardsmen, leads down to the Victoria Memorial, or the wedding cake as everyone calls it, with the gilded bronze figure of Victory on top, supported by the figures of courage and constancy. And this, the scene in front of Buckingham Palace. Of course, it was only 6 weeks or so ago that this area was filled with huge crowds helping to celebrate Victory in Europe Day. And again, despite the rather unpleasant weather, very good crowds have turned out today to witness this annual ceremony. And we hope that they'll stay to see the royal family again come out onto the balcony a little later and to watch the flypast by the Royal Air Force. 16 Tornadoes will fly over central London, and you'll be able to see that in our programme on BBC Two at 6:30 this evening. In front of Canada Gate, the massed mounted bands of the Household Cavalry, under the direction of the Director of Music of the Lifeguards, Major Colin Reeve, in their splendid state coats. In front of Buckingham Palace, there's the Sovereign's escort of the Household Cavalry, the red tunics and white plumes of the first two divisions of the Lifeguards. And it is their sovereign standard that will be carried today. And we can look right through the central archway into the inner courtyard, where the two outriders lead the barouche that carries Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And as they cross the forecourt, the field officer of the escort will give the orders for a royal salute, and the mass mounted bands will play the national anthem. Queen Elizabeth, accompanied again this year by Her Royal Highness Princess Margaret, the Queen Mother eschewing her favourite light blue and very attractive light green today, trying to cheer everyone up on this unpleasantly grey day. She came on to this parade for the first time 72 years ago to watch her husband, the then Duke of York, who of course later became king, riding in a barouche, one of two in the Royal Mews. This one was built in 1824. On Horse Guards Parade, they're preparing for the Queen Mother's arrival. This man, the field officer in brigade waiting, is responsible for most things that happened on here this morning. Lieutenant Colonel Archie Miller-Bakewell, who served for 20 years in the Blues and Royals, but is now the commanding officer of the 1st Battalion Scots Guards. He was the brigade major on parade last year and has swapped places with the man who commanded the 1st Battalion Scots Guards last year. The three officers of the escort, furthest from the camera, the subaltern, Captain James McEwen, whose great-grandfather fought in the trenches in World War I as a platoon commander in the Scots Guards. In the middle, the ensign, 2nd Lieutenant Ian Lindsay German, just 21 years old, the junior subaltern in the battalion. He joined only in January, says he always wanted to command Scottish soldiers. And the captain of the escort, Major Peter Farrelly, who was a mortar officer on Mount Tumbledown in the Falklands War, where he says he spent a very frustrating night trying to keep mortars operational on very boggy ground. And in front of the garden wall of number 10 Downing Street, the massed bands of the Household Division. The bands of the 5 Foot Guards regiments, the Grenadiers, Coldstream, Scots, Irish and Welsh, along with 3 corps of drums from the 1st Battalions of the Grenadiers, Scots and Welsh, and at the back a row of 20 from the pipes and drums of the 1st Battalion of the Scots Guards. 20 pipers, in all 325 musicians, 20 ranks wide by 15 deep. All under the guidance of 3 drum majors this year, just 3 as there were last year, and specifically the senior Drum Major Reg Sargent from the Grenadier Guards, performing for the first time in this role. The massed bands all under the direction of the Senior Director of Music, Lieutenant Colonel David Price, who coincidentally is the Director of Music of the Scots Guards and responsible for the very lovely music that I think we're going to hear today. As ever, crowds of all ages, including some who clearly have ambitions for a military life. Splendid uniform of a Gold Sergeant of the Scots Guards. Back at Buckingham Palace, the Sovereign's escort prepare to present arms to greet the arrival of Her Majesty the Queen. The trumpeter musician Corney plays the salute as Her Majesty in the ivory-mounted phaeton leaves Buckingham Palace, as she has done since 1987, the first year that she didn't ride onto parade. Leading her down the Mall, the massed mounted bands, then divisions 1 and 2 of the Sovereign's escort, followed by the phaeton. Carriage that was designed to be self-drive, but is actually a postilion driven today. Queen's head coachman riding the two matched greys of Twilight and Iceland, with the Crown equerry and an equerry waiting at the head. The rest of the royal procession following along behind, the 3 royal colonels. Two grooms immediately behind the phaeton. And at the other end of the Mall, there are cheers from the large crowds to greet the Queen Mother. Driven in the barouche by the Queen's Deputy Head Coachman, John Nelson. The barouche was very much a town runabout towards the end of the last century, where wealthy families would show off in style. Every major household had one. And now the number 3 guard has opened up, and the foot guards present arms. And as the barouche turns through the line of guards, the mass bands will play the national anthem. Queen Mother, accompanied by Princess Margaret, will now go into the headquarters building and will be taken up to that window just above the archway, where she'll join the rest of her party. Meanwhile, we await the arrival of the Queen's procession. Standing lonely, the colour party with the Queen's colour of the 1st Battalion Scots Guards, which bears 40 of the regiment's 92 hard-won battle honours. The excitement of victory was captured on canvas when the 1st Battalion fought its way over Tumbledown Mountain, adding another name, Falkland Islands, to their roll of battle honours. And we'll hear a famous march celebrating the battle a little later. At the Battle of the Alma in the Crimean War, the Scots Guards won 4 of their 11 VCs, and this tune was written for that victory. The colours in the hard-fought battle were saved at great cost by Lieutenant Thistlethwaite and Lieutenant Lindsay, a valiant young ensign whose great-great-great-nephew, Captain Robert Lindsay, is here watching today. The pipes, by long tradition, have sounded the battle cry and played the Scots into action. It's said that the Minges clan played the pipes at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. One of the things you can't do with bagpipes is play them softly, and their penetrating call was used to gather the clans across the hills. They're now thought of as Scotland's national instrument, and Son Donaldson not only plays them, but was also an apprenticed pipe maker. We visited the Edinburgh establishment of Mr. Craig Scott, who still makes pipes by hand. He was apprenticed at 16 and now owns his own business, where he needs the skills of a carpenter, joiner, salesman and businessman. The finest wood for the pipes is African blackwood, so dense that you can't drive a nail into it. After it's seasoned for 2 years, it's imported in blocks and so arrives one stage nearer to being turned with a very fine thread. Bagpipes are tuned by adjusting the sections of the pipe very slightly, so their fit must be precise. Old pipes can be renovated by reboring them. The traditional decoration or combing is put on by a chaser and a very steady hand. This is all a development from an ancient instrument played 2,000 to 3,000 years before Christ and made from simple materials. It came to Scotland by unknown routes, from Rome, through England, from Ireland, some say from Norway. The mounts on the pipes nowadays are plastic, but they were once ivory, and the plastic is closely modelled in that grain. There can be silver mounts too, finely chased with Celtic or old runic patterns. The 3 pipes, or drones, with their reeds, are fitted into a bag, which is usually made from sheepskin and acts as a reservoir of air. The uninterrupted flow of music comes as the player alternately blows to fill the bag and squeezes it with his elbow, while keeping the bag at a steady pressure to maintain the true pitch. It takes about 5 months to learn this skill. The pipes are decorated on the most special occasions by pipe banners. Fringed with gold, they bear battalion and company badges embroidered on each side. Like the colours, the banners and the tunes, the piper's dress also traces the history of the regiment. The Royal Stuart tartan shows their close link with the royal family. King George V himself decided in February 1928 that the Glengarry should be replaced by the feathered bonnet. Nowadays the feathers come from emu and not from the ostrich. 3 tassels on the sporran, like the groups of 3 buttons on the doublet, show that the regiment is 3rd in order of precedence among the foot guards. But the regiment was in fact formed in 1642, when the first Marquis of Argyll was commissioned by the King to raise a regiment to protect the Scottish settlements overseas. There are 8 buttons on each of the piper's spats, making a total of 16, and 42 buttons altogether on his doublet, making 1642, as a permanent reminder of the date the Scots Guards were raised. And in the mall, Her Majesty the Queen, followed by the 3 royal colonels and the Master of the Horse just behind, you can see in the white cocked hat. Leading the whole procession is the Brigade Major, Lieutenant Colonel Tom Fitzalan Howard, who commanded the 1st Battalion Scots Guards last year. As I was saying, he's almost sort of swapped places with the field officer. And he is the son of the Colonel of the Life Guards, General Lord Michael Fitzalan Howard, who we'll see a little later on the dais beside the Queen. And it is the Brigade Major's job, with the 4 troopers of the Life Guards immediately behind him, to ensure that the whole procession arrives on Horse Guards at exactly the right time. The massed mounted bands in their splendid gold tunics play the traditional cavalry march Preobrazhensky. white plumes of the Lifeguards Divisions 1 and 2 of the Sovereign's escort. And there the head coachman, who's new this year, Colin Henderson, in that magnificent state postilion jacket. They cost several £1,000s. I asked him if he'd be getting a new one, and he said he didn't think so. Some of them are over 100 years old in the Royal Mews. He actually was in the Blues and Royals. He was on this birthday parade the last time in 1970. He was a corporal of horse, rode many times in the Blues and Royals, and now 25 years later he is for the very first time driving Her Majesty the Queen. The reason actually that there is a new coachman this year is that rather sadly last year's head coachman Stephen Matthews lost his fiancée who died of leukemia, and he wanted a new start, so he's gone off and bought a livery yard near Dis, and I'm sure that everyone would wish him every success in that. Colin Henderson is riding Iceland, a 13-year-old Dutch grey. And waiting now for the Queen to turn actually onto Horse Guards Parade. The Queen Mother looking down on this splendid scene. And what a magnificent year it's been for her, particularly with her great triumph in Hyde Park when she addressed the veterans on the commemorations of VE Day. And you can see the saddlecloth that the head coachman is sitting on. When the Queen rode onto parade, there were 5 different saddlecloths, one for each regiment of foot guards. And when she stopped riding in 1987, the saddlecloths were divided into 2 to make up the outside half of the 2 cloths that are now used, so that her rank as Colonel-in-Chief would still show. And in fact, it was these very saddlecloths that were used that year when the 2nd Battalion, the Scots Guards, trooped their colour for the last time. And of course, in those days, Her Majesty used to wear the uniform of Colonel-in-Chief. Now dressed in mufti, she has just those brooches as a recognition. The large brooch of the Household Division, and below it a brooch presented by the officers of the Scots Guards. As they all do, they acknowledge the Queen's colour of the 1st Battalion Scots Guards. Behind Her Majesty, the 3 colonels. In the centre, His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, Colonel of the Grenadier Guards. On his right, His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, Colonel of the Scots Guards, who reviewed this parade on the 2nd rehearsal last week. And on the left of the picture, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Colonel of the Welsh Guards. The only Royal Colonel missing this year is the Colonel of the Irish Guards, Grand Duke Prince John, the Grand Duke of Luxembourg, who's away on other duties. The ivory-mounted phaeton will draw up behind the dais, which this year for the first time has a cover on it, such as the weather that we're expecting. And once the Queen is safely on the dais, she'll be greeted by a royal salute.
Royal salute, return on!
And following a practice that was begun in 1907, only then it was in St James's Park, the King's Troop of the Royal Horse Artillery fire a 41-gun salute. 6 guns firing at 10-second intervals. It'll take 7 minutes to complete. On Horse Guards, the Brigade Major now leads the Queen and a smaller procession to inspect the parade. They go initially to the slow march Brentwood Bay, which was arranged by Lieutenant Colonel David Price, and it's the first time that the pipes have played at this point in the parade by special permission of the Queen. And the quick march for the inspection of the household cavalry is Crags of Tumbledown Mountain, which has become an emotional and evocative march for the Scots Guards. Crags of Tumbledown Mountain was composed by drum major Jimmy Riddle, actually on Tumbledown Mountain, the main action involving the Scots Guards in the Falklands War of 1982. And he scribbled the score out on the back of a ration packet, which is safely kept in the Regimental Museum. Well, that completes the first phase, the inspection. The procession will now return to the saluting base before the next phase, the troop by the mass bands, which is followed by the actual trooping the colour, then the march past in slow and quick time, followed by the rank past in slow and quick time by the household cavalry. The three royal colonels, a particularly significant day for the Duke of Kent as Colonel of the Scots Guards on the right, the 26th Colonel of the Scots Guards. And the Major General, who's responsible for all the troops on parade, is also in the procession, Major General Ian Mackay-Dick. Who was commissioned into the Scots Guards in 1965. He fought in Borneo as a platoon commander, was in the Falklands as the 2IC of the 2nd Battalion, and most recently was commander of the British forces in Falklands until June of last year. His first Queen's birthday parade as the Major General. And now Her Majesty is joined on the dais by the two colonels of the household cavalry, Major General Lord Michael Fitzalan Howard on the left, the colonel of the Life Guards, who himself was a Scots Guardsman back in 1938 and was Major General from 1969 to 71. He's the Gold Stick in waiting, and on the right of the Queen, General Sir Desmond Fitzpatrick, who's Colonel of the Blues and Royals. Well, shortly, a single word of command from the field officer. Troop will be the order for the mass bands to slow march across Horse Guards to the traditional tune The Huguenots by Meyerbeer. And now the quick march called Nairn, which was composed by the senior director of music with the beautiful Highland town of that name in mind. Nairn is on the coast of the Moray Firth between Inverness and Elgin, and even for a Sassenach like myself, the sound is enough to transport you from the dust and grime of central London to a place of infinite and rare beauty. Sergeant Robert Young leaves the mass bands, ready to beat the drummer's call. The drummer's call, the signal for the officers to take post. And of course, before the days of radio communications, many of the signals on the battlefield were given by drums and bugles. An orderly takes the pace stick from the regimental Sergeant Major, Alan Crawford, who draws his sword, the only occasion that a warrant officer does that on parade, as they prepare to move forward to collect the colour. The captain of the escort, Major Peter Farrelly, will hand over command at this point to the subaltern, Captain James McEwen. And he will take the escort forward, the left wheel across the parade ground, ready to collect the colour. They'll go, as they always do, to the tune the British Grenadiers, traditionally played because the right flank company of every regiment of the line was a company of Grenadiers.
Escort for the colour by the left, quick march!
The subaltern halts the escort exactly 20 paces from the colour. The escort for the colour are about to become the escort to the colour. The sergeant major will march around to the colour, collecting the ensign as he goes. And the man with 24 years service in the regiment will then hand over the colour to the 21-year-old blonde-haired young officer who only joined the battalion in January. A young man whose piercing blue eyes reveal why he was head of his school CCF, and why no doubt he'll thoroughly enjoy realising his ambition of commanding Scottish soldiers. And once he safely has the colour, the escort will present arms and the mass bands will play the national anthem. Notice the 4 guides and markers at the corners of the escort, with their arms at the high port in symbolic protection of the escort, who were vulnerable as they presented arms. Well, the subaltern now prepares the escort to march through the ranks of the other 5 guards. They'll advance initially to the slow march Escort to the Colour, an adaptation of Waldteufel's waltz, The Grenadiers, which is always played at this point. The escort then left wheels, and as they approach number 6 guard, the field officer will order the rest of the guards to present arms, and the bands will play the Grenadiers' Slow March, a march that's used to march the Grenadier Guards back into barracks after changing the guard. Massed bands, meanwhile, carry out one of 3 spin wheels, a highly complex manoeuvre that's designed to change the direction of the mass of musicians without changing the formation. If you've ever driven around the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, you'll have some idea what it's like. If you're near the outside, you have to whiz around desperately avoiding others coming at you from all angles, while those on the inside invariably find themselves going up the Champs-Élysées when they wanted the Avenue de Grande Armée. Of course, in the spin wheel, such apparent chaos is an optical illusion. With a paradoxical precision, the wave of a director of music's arms restores the previous perfect symmetry, and the noble tones continue with never a dropped crotchet or shaky quaver. big oil painting of the Battle of Alma that we saw earlier, which hangs in the officers' mess of the 1st Battalion, exemplifies what this ceremony is all about. 2 young officers surrounded by the mayhem of battle, locked in hand-to-hand combat in a last-ditch effort to save the colours. Lieutenants Thistlethwaite and Lindsay won the Victoria Cross for their valour. Young Ian Lindsay German will win no more than the accolades of his peers for a job well done. But he continues a tradition that means more than just pure ceremony. For centuries, the colours have represented the regiment and all it stands for. And as such, everyone had to be able to recognise them. This act of trooping the colour was a regular part of service life for that very practical reason. The 5 black figures on the Guards Memorial represent the 5 regiments of Foot Guards whose men fought and died in 2 world wars. Nearly 5,500 officers and soldiers of the Household Division were killed in the Second World War. In this 50th anniversary year of the ending of that conflict, we've given thanks for their deeds. But the losses go on. 13 years ago, almost to the day, 8 Scots Guards were killed and 41 injured in the battle on Mount Tumbledown. One of those 41 could easily have become number 9, but for the quick thinking of his comrades. Guardsman Scott Binney had his windpipe shot away. Piper Rogers and Guardsman Noble took the batteries out of a torch and with that and a barrow made a pipe he could breathe through. Scott Binney is now a father of 2. His first son, Clark, he named after his section commander, Sergeant Clark Mitchell, one of the 8 who didn't come back. Of the escort now reassumes command and orders the escort to present arms, returning the compliment to the rest of the parade.
Escort to the colour! Present! Arms! And
so that's the actual trooping complete. The field officer will now prepare the whole parade for the march past, first in slow and then in quick time. And this is a blessed relief for the guardsmen in guards numbers 2 to 6 who've been static for the best part of an hour. It requires tremendous concentration. It's a long day for them. Reveille was at 4:30 this morning. Breakfast, which they are required to attend, was at 5 o'clock. Onto the buses to leave the barracks in Windsor at 6 o'clock before doing mass drill with all the other guards in Wellington Barracks, and then the march here to Horse Guards. Guards 1 to 5 will reform to the tune Hazelmere, played by the Corps of Drums. The field officer will now give orders for number 6 guard to move separately so that they're in the right position to begin the slow march. All 6 guards will set off at 65 paces per minute in an apparently gentle perambulation around Horse Guards. The music initially will be Golden Spurs, a march that was written by Sam Rhodes, the director of music of the Scots Guards for 21 years from the outbreak of the Second World War. The title refers to the golden spurs worn by the Royal Artillery Mounted Band, which Rhodes had previously been bandmaster of. The escort and number 2 guards swing through 90 degrees by means of a left form. Originally this manoeuvre was a wheel, but the form, which is much neater, was introduced in 1889, although it didn't apparently find favour with the spectators at the time. By 1895, exactly 100 years ago, they no doubt got used to the idea. That year was the one and only time that Queen Victoria officially watched the parade from a carriage, and by coincidence, it was the Scots Guards who were trooping their colour. Slow march past, the colour moves to the front of the escort so that it can be lowered and seen in all its glory. field officer will lead the march past, riding Port Stanley, a superb over 17-hand charger that belongs to the commanding officer of the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment, followed by the major of the parade on Noble, who's behaving rather better than the mount he had last week, Hush Money. And so the 1st Battalion Scots Guards march past their Colonel-in-Chief. They'll do it to the regimental slow march, the garb of Old Gaul. With a flourish of swords and a ripple of black bearskins, the ensign lowers the Queen's colour. Crimson silk with a gold fringe, the lion rampant of Scotland. 40 yellow scrolls showing just some of the regiment's battle honours. The very first one being Namur in 1695, exactly 300 years ago. These young men really do have a long and distinguished tradition to maintain. The garb of Old Gaul continues for number 3 Guard, F Company of the Scots Guards, and changes to Scipio for number 4 Guard, the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards. Scipio, the regimental slow march of the Grenadiers, plays 2 for number 5 Guard, found by Nijmegen Company, maintaining the customs and traditions of the old 2nd Battalion Grenadier Guards. And finally, Figaro, the slow march of the Coldstream Guards. Number 6 Guard is found by 7 Company, and that's all that's left of the 2nd Battalion Coldstream Guards. Adjutant of the parade, Captain Lincoln Jopp, the son of a distinguished racing driver and proud owner of the Sword of Honour from Sandhurst, which he's carrying. Field officer who'd been beside Her Majesty for the march past now salutes, and he'll then ride across the parade ground to give the orders for the quick march. The mass bands meanwhile play the neutral slow march by Bonnie Banks, an arrangement of a traditional Scottish tune by Sergeant David Jackson, who's on parade with the Scots Guards band today. regimental motto of the Scots Guards is Nemo me impugn lecacit, which I'm told roughly translated means ward or meddle with me, or even more loosely translated, who do you think you're shoving, Jimmy? Well, it would be a brave man indeed who contemplated shoving these fighting men anywhere. 13 years ago they came off ceremonial duties and within hours were preparing to go to the Falklands. They change gear smoothly from 65 paces per minute to 116 to the quick march road to the Isles, while the pipers move from the back of the mass bands to the front, as ordained especially by the new sovereign in 1952. So once again, Colonel Miller Bakewell leads his men in the march past. This time the colour stays at the back of the escort as if in battle formation, and the ensign will let fly the colour but not lower it. There's a great affection for all things Scottish in the royal family. The Queen Mother, of course, was raised there, and no doubt they'll particularly enjoy the skirl of the pipes as they play the Scots Guards Regimental Quick March, Heelan Laddie. Guards 4 and 5, perhaps the most famous of all regimental marches, the British Grenadiers. And finally the Coldstream Guards and Millenolo. Officer once again salutes, acknowledged by Her Majesty. And as the column of scarlet and black returns to the other side of Horse Guards, the mass bands continue the very Scottish theme with Pride of Princess Street, composed by a famous Scots Guards director of music, Major Jimmy Howe. Sign of a repeat of an incident that happened in 1934 when Second Lieutenant Clowes of the Scots Guards found his right arm going to sleep while carrying the colour. So, introducing a move not previously found in the Manual of Army Drill, he changed arms and carried it with his left hand. History doesn't relate exactly what the Sergeant Major said afterwards. Ian Lindsay, German, I hasten to add, has performed impeccably. So the march past in slow and quick time by the foot guards is complete. The field officer will give the orders for the foot guards to resume their original positions in readiness for the rank past in slow and quick time by the household cavalry. Yet another immaculate display by the men in scarlet tunics and black bearskins, their highly polished boots gleaming even in the absence of any sunshine. The mass bands will now move away to the side with the pipes and drums playing Scots Guards Review, which was composed in 1961 by Pipe Major Rowe to commemorate the 25th year of His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester's appointment as Colonel of the regiment. So the massed mounted bands lead on the household cavalry, led by their director of music, Major Colin Reeve, and the two superb drum horses, Constantine and Belisarius, or as they're more commonly known in the stables, Eric and Basil. And they walk on to Men of Harlech. Tassels hanging down below the heads of the drum horses, all very much part of the old saddlery designed to prevent the thrust and cut of swords going through the windpipe. As with so much of the uniforms that we see on parade, particularly from the household cavalry, dating back hundreds of years. Field officer of the escort leads on the sovereign standard of the lifeguards, accompanied by the trumpeter, followed by the escort commander, and then the first two divisions of the lifeguards. Field officer Major Rafe Griffin, 6 foot 6 inches, riding an equally large charger. Before he joined the army, worked as a cowboy in Texas on a 32,000-acre ranch. Now the foot guards will present arms. The mounted bands play the Lifeguards, the regimental walk march of the Army's senior regiment. In the early 18th century, the Lifeguards were manned by gentlemen, the position of private being purchased in the same way that the gentry bought commissions in other regiments. Typically it cost 100 guineas. To this day, officers refer to their troopers as gentlemen. And so this band of gentlemen affirm their continuing loyalty to the Queen as their sovereign standard is lowered in salute. And now the bobbing red plumes and blue tunics of the Blues and Royals. here the farriers with their gleaming axes. Every army horse has its regimental and army number stamped on a hoof, and in the days when grape shot and musket ball cut them down, the point of the axe would be driven through their foreheads to make sure they were dead, and the blade then used to cut off the hoof as proof the horse had been killed. The massed bands now play a short burst of the old Royals march. And in an innovation this year, the trumpeter has moved ahead to play the trumpet call. To the tune Money Musk. This date, the 17th of June, is the eve of the Battle of Waterloo, and it's one that's always celebrated by the lifeguards. To quote from a Victorian history, on the 17th of June, while amid a violent storm, the Duke of Wellington, of course, was falling back on Waterloo. The lifeguards, accompanied by the 23rd Dragoons, charged a large force of the enemy's lancers, supported by a great mass of cuirassiers, against which the 7th Hussars, who twice gallantly charged them, had failed to make any impression. But the household troops and their comrades scattered the foe in every direction and pursued them with great slaughter through an adjoining village. Then they rejoined the main body of the army in front of the village of Waterloo, where, in the drenching rain, the thunder pealing and the lightning gleaming over the weird scene, without food, without shelter, each trooper stood at his horse's head throughout the stormy night, which heralded a still more stormy morrow. And this sight is very familiar to the one that scattered the French. Now, of course, in their role in this attire, they're purely ceremonial. Today they go into battle in armoured reconnaissance vehicles and light tanks, but with no less courage or sense of duty. Guards once again present arms, and the mounted bands play the regimental trot, the keel row. So the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment pay compliments to their Colonel-in-Chief, as do their mounted bands. The immensely skilled musicians who not only play to a superb standard, but also manage to control their horses at the same time. Those magnificent kettle drums of fine silver, richly ornamented with royal and regimental devices in frosted silver in high relief. Presented to the Blues by George III and the Lifeguards by William IV, Valued at the time at 1,000 guineas. Who knows what they're worth now. The troopers who join the Household Cavalry Regiment, for the most part, have never ridden before. Only 1 in 20 has actually ridden before they join. They do a 5-month course before they're allowed out on ceremonial duties. And generally, the musicians are given the quietest horses to at least give them some chance of playing musically. As the director of music turns, that will be the signal for the field officer in brigade waiting to give the final royal salute.
Royal salute! Up!
And so yet another Queen's Birthday Parade nears its completion anyway here on Horse Guards. Shortly the Queen will ride at the head of her foot guards back to Buckingham Palace, where there'll be one more march past in front of the forecourt, which will include the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. The Guards now will form 12 divisions, each of 36 men in 3 ranks. And they'll do it while the Corps of Drums play the adjutant. Meanwhile, the massed mounted bands move away up the side of Horse Guards. They'll go off up the approach road. Once again, will lead the whole procession back down the Mall. Immense preparations required for a parade like this. The musicians, though, have one less duty than most. They normally pay the troopers of the Household Cavalry to groom their horses for them. I'm told £12 is the going rate. Now in divisions, they'll close up into column of route to Prussian Glory, again played by the fifes and drums. Moving into the approach road behind the mass mounted bands, the Sovereign's escort. It's been a long time in the saddle for the troopers, the lifeguards and the Blues and Royals. By the time they get back to their barracks in Knightsbridge in about an hour's time, they'll have been in the saddle for 4 hours. They too, like the foot guards, have a very long day, and indeed for some of them it won't be over then. They have to mount the Queen's Lifeguard at 4 o'clock this afternoon here on Horse Guards, a ceremony that normally takes place at 11 o'clock in the morning. The field officer trots forward to ask permission from Her Majesty to march off parade. So with permission granted, Colonel Archie Miller-Bakewell returns to the centre of the parade ground. Port Stanley, his charger, didn't behave particularly well last week, but is ridden in every day of the week. And that's what they've been waiting for to happen in the Mall. Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret riding back in the barouche. And once they pass the approach road, as they do now, all should be clear for the royal procession to proceed, and the signal for that will come from the Garrison Sergeant Major, Sergeant Major Perry Mason. Physically 6 foot 6 inches tall, but metaphorically a giant of still greater stature. So the ivory mounted phaeton, which has been held inside the old Admiralty building during the parade, now comes out again. And once the signal comes from the Garrison Sergeant Major, Her Majesty will climb aboard the phaeton. Although his role actually on parade here is to signal to the field officer that the Mall is clear, and there is the signal, his presence is felt by everyone involved. This postilion carriage the orders come from the field officer for the quick march, which is 3 Scottish songs, an arrangement by the senior director of music of 3 popular tunes: I Love a Lassie, Roman in the Gloaming and Loch Lomond. Majesty give a little acknowledgement over her shoulder to the Duke of Edinburgh. She clearly seemed to have enjoyed the parade, as has the huge crowd around Horse Guards as they applaud the Foot Guards marching off parade. An early colonel of Life Guards delivered this rallying cry to his troops on the eve of battle. To be overcome is the fortune of war, but to fly is the fashion of cowards. So let us teach the world that Englishmen would rather be acquainted with death than fear. The Scots Guards have proved over generations that they possess such courage and discipline, qualities that are fostered on the parade ground and exemplified in displays of excellence such as we've seen today. We may not be able to bat or bowl, but at least there are still some things at which we're unsurpassed. "100 years ago, Queen Victoria reviewed her birthday parade for the first time towards the end of her long reign. It was a very pretty sight," she said. "The bands played extremely well." At the age of 69, Her Majesty the Queen has already taken the salute here on Horse Guards 44 times, and I doubt if the bands had often played better. In the words of the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Runcie, a wartime Scots Guardsman, royalty puts a human face on the operation of government and provides images with which the people of the nation can identify and which they can love. Happy birthday, Your Majesty.